Hello and welcome to Newscentre. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The Supreme Court has struck down the third extension in tenure given to SK Mishra, the head of the Enforcement Directorate. It has termed it illegal and has ordered Mishra to relinquish office by the 31st of July. Remember, the Apex Court had struck down an extension given to Mishra in 2021, but the government had promulgated an ordinance to nullify the order. Ashwin Kumar is here with the details on what transpired in the court.
Well, the Supreme Court clearly has said that while the centre does indeed have the power to go ahead and to grant such extensions for a 5-year term, it has held that as far as this specific case is concerned of SK Mishra, it is invalid in law, and towards that end had asked SK Mishra to demit office by July 31st. The rationale of the Apex Court being that India will be undergoing an evaluation by the FATF, and so to ensure that there's a smooth transition of power, the Supreme Court has granted that small leeway of allowing SK Mishra to end his term on July 31st. Now, here's the background to it of it all. SK Mishra was appointed in 2018 for a 2-year term. Subsequently, 3 times, 2020, 2021 and 2022, government had granted him a 1-year extension. This was the 3rd extension that he's currently operating on. In the midst of it all, in 2021, the Supreme Court had held that SK Mishra cannot be allowed any further extensions. That, in turn, had been nullified by an ordinance, and therefore we had this litigation before the Apex Court. So on the question of the ordinance and the power and the changes that were made to the law, well, the Supreme Court said that that's kosher, that's good, that's fine. The centre does indeed have the power to grant this extension, but with respect to SK Mishra, the Supreme Court noted that any such move that will nullify the Apex Court order, that will nullify the mandamus that was granted by the Apex Court when it had explicitly said that this SK Mishra cannot be allowed to continue as the ED director, that cannot be permitted, that is not good in law, and that is invalid in law. So the Apex Court asking for SK Mishra to demit office July 31st should be his last date in the office.
All right, thanks Ashwin for joining us. We're now joined by senior lawyer HP Ranina. Mr. Ranina, thank you for joining us. Now, the Supreme Court has made it clear that the extensions given to the ED director on the 17th of November 2021 and 17th of November 2022 were illegal. Now, all the decisions that have been taken since 17th November 2021, could they be up for questioning? Can a person affected by ED's orders during the period of SK Mishra's tenure go to the Supreme Court, seek relief?
I don't think that is possible. And even if somebody goes, I don't think the Supreme Court will grant relief, because he has taken certain action based on a law which was passed by the ordinance. Now that law has been struck down, that cannot have any retrospective effect. Secondly, the Supreme Court itself has permitted him to continue until 31st of July. And therefore, there is some sanctity given to that past appointment. So no action can be challenged. And I don't think the Supreme Court will ever challenge an action which has already been taken, because that would create chaos in the legal profession and in the law as such. So it's not going to happen that way.
Right. I would also like to ask you that when the Supreme Court had decided against the extension given to SK Mishra, there was an ordinance brought by the government. Later on, there was a law passed in Parliament where the government could extend the tenure of the ED director by 1 year up to a period of 5 years. Does that law remain unaffected at all? Can that now apply to future ED directors?
Well, we have to read the judgment. I don't know what exactly is mentioned in the judgment of the Supreme Court. But normally, I think in this particular case, since the Supreme Court had struck down his earlier extension, they felt that this was, the executive was trying to trample upon the area of the judicial review. And in view of the separation of powers guaranteed by the Constitution of India, you cannot do that. Now, as far as the law is concerned, the law itself has not been struck down. It is the extension which has been struck down. So I think the law will remain, and in future possibly they can give extension for 5 years. So in the case of SK Mishra, it's a very special case in view of the fact that the Supreme Court had already given its view that his extension was invalid in law. But the government tried to overrule that and tried to nullify the Supreme Court's order. That is something which has been struck down, because that is unconstitutional. Supreme Court, executive and parliament are separate organs of the state, and each one has to respect its own grounds and cannot tread on the other.
Right. So, Mr. Ranina, is it fair to understand that this particular judgment of the Supreme Court was limited to SK Mishra's case? It will not have a precedent, nor bearing on other ED directors appointed in future and any extension that the government wants to give to them?
That's what I believe, but I think we need to read the judgment. We need to read the fine print of the judgment and see exactly what it says. But as things stand, and what has been mentioned by your correspondent, it appears that it's in the specific case of SK Mishra that they have struck it down and said that you cannot overrule the Supreme Court's earlier order. But for the sake of convenience, he has been allowed to continue until 31st of July.
Right. And finally, Mr. Ranina, what will this mean for the separation of powers and future actions by government when it comes to extensions given to other important officials, other important heads of department? Because the Supreme Court made an important point saying transgression of constitutional limitations and intrusion into judicial power by legislature is violative of principles of separation of powers. What will be the impact of this judgment in future cases and government functioning in future, especially in appointments?
As far as future is concerned, one has to see whether the law which has been already passed by Parliament is constitutionally valid or not. I don't think that act has been challenged in the Supreme Court. And therefore, if the act has not been challenged in the Supreme Court, then that law will continue and will prevail. Because legislature also has its own right to pass such legislation as it deems fit. Therefore, the Supreme Court may not interfere in future. That's my view of the matter as I read, as I understand what has happened in today's decision. But as I said, we have to read the fine print and exactly come to the conclusion what has been stated. But the separation of powers is
And
a
one more
fundamental
question.
principle of the Constitution and is a basic structure of the Constitution which cannot be changed.
Right. One important point that the Supreme Court, while concluding and allowing the extension to go on till the 31st of July, the court acknowledged that, yes, there is an FATF review that is going on right now, and we want a smooth transition in public interest. The government needs to be given some time. How important is this period for the Enforcement Directorate, for the Government of India, with this FATF review that is ongoing?
Well, it's difficult for me to comment on that, how relevant, because another 20 days are what remain till 31st of July. To what extent this is appropriate, I cannot comment on it. But possibly if the government feels that it is not adequate, they may make an application to the Supreme Court once again and ask for further time, maybe another 15 days or another month. But on what basis they have come to this decision, I cannot comment, because they feel that 20 days is enough. If the Supreme Court thinks 20 days is enough, well, so be it. And if the government feels otherwise, they can always make an application and ask for further time be given.
All right. Mr. Ranina, thank you so much for joining us with your perspective on this important judgment with regard to the extension of the ED director. Moving on and sticking to the court corner, a 5-judge constitution bench of the Supreme Court will start hearing petitions challenging abrogation of Article 370 from the 2nd of August. Remember, the centre's move in August 2019, close 4 years ago, had stripped Jammu and Kashmir of its special status. The apex court has said that the bench will hear the case on a regular day-to-day basis, except Mondays and Fridays. The court has also said that the centre's latest affidavit shall not be relied upon to argue on the aspect of constitutionality. And the Supreme Court has deferred hearing the Adani Hindenburg matter to August. The court said SEBI should conclude the investigation by the 15th of August. SEBI lawyers said their investigation is underway with all available resources, so the hearing is now deferred to August. We're going to take a short break, but up next, an important moment for the Indian defence industry. The government has cleared proposals to buy 26 Rafale jets and 3 Scorpeme submarines. Both deals could be announced during Prime Minister Modi's visit to France and meeting with President Macron later this week. A special discussion on the other side. Welcome back. You're watching Newscentre. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to visit Paris later this week as the guest of honour at the Bastille Day parade. The visit is expected to strengthen the strategic partnership between the two nations. Large defence contracts, trade cooperation and bilateral ties are the possible themes of this visit. Let me now go across to Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, the Director General of the National Maritime Foundation. Mr. Chauhan, thank you. Admiral Chauhan, thank you so much for joining us. We're hearing of 2 or 3 key defence deals likely to be signed. The first is the acquisition of 26 Rafale marine aircraft for the Indian Navy. Now, these, we believe, have been cleared by the Defence Procurement Board. The next step would be to go to the Defence Acquisition Council. How important will these be for the Indian Navy? This has been a long pending demand.
Well, on a scale of 0 to 10, there'll be 11. So they're that important. It is critical for the Indian Navy's aircraft carrier to be properly equipped. And I think that, as you rightly say, this hunt for the correct aircraft has been on for quite a long time. And I'm particularly pleased to see that we are getting a state-of-the-art aircraft, one that is some commonality between us and the Indian Air Force, thereby providing at least some degree of a commonality of approach in terms of maintenance as well as in terms of operating philosophies. Of course, there are differences, but the similarities also do exist. So, it's critical.
Right. So you're saying that it will be critical to see this deal going through. The other important deal on Scorpeme submarines. These will be manufactured by Mazagon Dock Limited. How do you think these set of submarines that will be manufactured in future will be different from the ones previously manufactured at Mazagon Dock Limited?
Well, first of all, as you are aware, these particular follow-on 3 will be already AIP equipped, that is air independent propulsion equipped. And the air independent propulsion units have been made indigenously and will be fitted on board the 3 submarines, thereby enhancing the submarines' underwater endurance, which is a huge factor because without an air-independent propulsion mechanism or very advanced new forms of lithium-ion batteries, a submarine, a diesel-electric submarine, has to surface every few days in order to recharge her batteries. And during the period of her submarine's surfacing, whether she doesn't actually surface, she puts out a snorkel, one of these tubes, but anything that you penetrate the surface with from underwater makes your submarine indiscreet and therefore more liable and susceptible to detection. So the facts of the new Scorpeme's AIP is crucial. Perhaps even more crucial is the fact that, it is imperative that submarine building skills, which have taken us almost a decade to rediscover after the original HDW-209 class of submarines were abandoned in terms of build, and then the skill sets that are required to actually make the yard productive over time, keep its efficiency high, build efficiencies, in fact, and then all of this will be a huge shot in the arm for not only the Navy, but for the nation as a whole.
Admiral Chauhan, what does this mean for our defence PSUs, especially Mazagon Dock Limited? We saw the Mazagon Dock Limited coming into focus during the Prime Minister's visit to the United States as well, where the US Navy signed an agreement with MDL for the possible repairing of Navy ships, US Navy ships in future. What will this mean for our defence PSUs?
Well, first of all, we must appreciate the fact that Mazagon Docks has been the, primus inter pares, the first amongst equal of our PSUs. It is the lead submarine building dock, and consequently, as I said, first and foremost, specifically for Mazagon Docks, it will enable Mazagon Docks to retain the skill sets that it has so carefully nurtured since the Scorpene program began. And continued production of any major platform is critical, particularly if it is submarine. I had the recent privilege of going across to TKM in Germany, in Kiel, and I can assure you that they too are always worrying about how do you keep the production line going. But what about other PSUs other than Mazagon Docks? You will appreciate that the production of an indigenous construction of such a major platform as a diesel electric submarine doesn't involve just the yard. It involves a whole host of ancillary industries that provide equipment, that provide systems, that innovate, and that once a submarine line or a ship line is in progress, all of this Atmanirbhar Bharat and the startup, the numbers of unicorns that will emerge out of these sheer opportunities that are on offer will be a shot in the arm for everybody. What about yards which have not got the Scorpene order, the PSUs? They too will be able to now harness their skill sets, their capabilities towards the very large number of surface platforms that are also being built towards developing the kind of Navy that India requires. So I think it's a win-win situation across the board,
Right.
not just for Mazagon Docks as a PSU, which is clearly the case, but also for other PSUs and for a host, as I said, of Indian industries, ranging from the very small startup to the established players, both in the private as well as the public spaces, thereby generating public-private partnerships as well. So I can't find a single flaw in this whole process. Parikshit?
Right. My final question, very quickly, Admiral Chauhan, if you can explain to us, how will this visit of the Prime Minister enhance the India-France defense and strategic partnership? When it comes to the Indian Navy, yes, we've had a long-standing partnership with France, but how is it likely to get a boost during this visit of the Prime Minister?
Well, if the two deals that we are discussing actually do go through, and every indication is that they will, then I think France will be catapulted in its position as the lead naval supplier of platforms. But you must appreciate that what we're not looking at is we're not looking simply at a buyer-seller relationship with anybody, least of all France. What we're trying to ensure this time around is that there is genuine not transfer of technology, but genuine joint development of technology. In other words, if you were to ask me from the Prime Minister's visit, what will be the single largest takeaway for India? It will be the investment of high-quality, high-end personnel from both sides who will jointly be able to develop the technologies that are inherent in any large platform, and once you have both a submarine at one end and you have fighter jets at the other end, then you are looking at an enormous engagement process between France and India. And France has been one of our most reliable defense partners. And I want to reiterate the fact that if all that we're going to be doing is buying and selling, then I think these relationships are nonsensical. If, on the other hand, what is going to happen, and I believe that this is what is going to happen, is that there is a joint development of technology. The differentials between the base technologies of India and France might well be large, but India has needles of excellence which have won Nobel Prizes. And France has got needles of excellence that have won Nobel Prizes. When we combine these needles of excellence, then what happens is that we are in a position to leapfrog technologies, not simply play catch up with one or another of the existing powers, but actually develop disruptive technologies in the underwater domain, in the aviation domain. And that is the strength that this particular deal will bring. And I'm 100% confident that our Prime Minister will indeed be able to bring home the bacon, as they say. And I have very little doubt that the French-India partnership will grow from strength to the benefit of both countries pretty much equally.
Admiral Chauhan, we've run out of time, but thank you so much for joining us. So you would want us to move beyond a buyer-seller relationship to a deeper technological partnership. Thanks once again for those sharp views here on CNBC-TV18. Moving on to all the market action now. Sensex gained over 270 points and Nifty gained over 80 points. This despite a sharp fall in bank stocks in the last hour of trade. The Nifty Bank Index lost over 100 points today. On the other hand, mid-caps outperformed the blue chips with the index gaining over 300 points. IT giants TCS and HCL Tech will kickstart the first quarter earnings for this fiscal. It looks to be a tepid quarter for the IT sector with multiple headwinds expected to take a toll on the top line. Rima Tendulkar joins us now. Rima, what's in store for IT companies as far as earnings are concerned?
Q1 FY24 is expected to be weak despite the strong seasonality which typically takes place in the June quarter. What's hurting? Uncertain macros have led to a cut in discretionary spending. Projects are getting deferred. Some of them are going to get cancelled. And this is likely to result in a revenue decline for Wipro and Tech Mahindra. We're expecting a flat revenue growth for both TCS and HCL Tech, while Infosys could clock in a constant currency revenue growth of 0.7% on a quarter-on-quarter basis. And just to put it in context, typically the June quarter is very strong, and last year all these companies grew between 2 to 5% last year. Moving on to margins. Now, margins are likely to remain depressed despite the easing supply-side challenges, and that's on account of weak operating leverage. Margins for, margins for Tech Mahindra and TCS are likely to show a sharp decline. That's on account of wage hike. But for the others, it's expected to remain on the flatter side. The silver lining in the quarter is going to be the strong deal wins and the order pipeline. Most companies, in fact, have announced very large deal wins. For TCS, for instance, there was this $1.8 billion BSNL deal. There was a Standard Life deal. There was Marks & Spencer's deal. Infosys, if you remember, had announced a very large, nearly $500 million deal with a Nordic bank called Danske. And even the others, if you go down the chain, mid-cap IT companies have all reported pretty good order wins, and that's because cost optimization projects have been on the rise. Now let's talk about the guidance for FY24. Now, analysts expect both Infi and TCS to largely maintain their guidance, though for Infosys, the guidance at the upper end may come down. Earlier, it was 4 to 7%. It will come down to 4 to 6%, while HCL Tech's revenue guidance will be maintained, and both these companies are likely to hold on to their margin guidance. All eyes will also be on the new CEO at TCS, K. Krithivasan, as he took over the company from 1st of June. On Infosys, there have been a spate of exits over the last couple of months, which has got the markets a bit worried.
All right, let's now get you more news, and this is on the weather conditions across North India. There is a rainfall prediction in many parts. We're looking at a heavy waterlogging situation, some amount of destruction as well. Let's get you the latest reports from North India.
मूसलाधार बारिश ने पूरे उत्तर भारत को अपनी चपेट में ले लिया है। हिमाचल प्रदेश हो, उत्तराखंड हो, दिल्ली के तमाम जो इलाके हैं वो इस वक्त पानी में डूबे हुए नजर आ रहे हैं। और इस वक्त हम मौजूद हैं हिमाचल प्रदेश में छोटी काशी कहे जाने वाले मंडी जिले में, जहां पर मेरे ठीक पीछे ये बहने वाली व्यास नदी कल अपने उफान पर थी। और उसकी बड़ी वजह ये थी कि पंडोह डैम के भर जाने की वजह से चारों गेटों को खोल दिया गया था, जिसके बाद ये जो व्यास नदी है प्रचंड वेग के साथ उफान लिए हुए आगे बढ़ती चली गई। और उसके बाद ये बढ़ते बढ़ते पानी यहाँ ऊंचाई तक आ गया था, और वो जो छत आप देख रहे हैं, ये पहली छत, वो पूरी तरीके से डूब चुका था। और ये पानी अगर वहां देखें तो रिहायशी इलाकों में भर गया था, और वहां SDRF और NDRF को तैनात किया गया था। रास्ता पूरी तरीके से ब्लॉक कर दिया गया था।
There are areas where water has entered in the household, and in fact I'm standing in one such house where water has in fact entered, and you can see in the visuals, in fact these people have been asked to vacate the area, but they are saying that they are living here since years, and now it is very difficult to shift the all items and the essential needs. पानी कब आया आपके?
पानी जी कल से, मतलब सुबह से स्टार्ट हो गया आना 10 बजे से।
हाँ,
बढ़ गया, मतलब धीरे धीरे एकदम से तेजी से बढ़ा, अब भी बढ़ रहा, तो अब धीरे धीरे बढ़ा बिल्कुल.
We are currently present inside the Pragati Maidan tunnel, which is now closed for 4 days, and the efforts are currently being made to remove the water at the earliest. At the same time, you can see that this is the place which is completely filled with water, and this is also one such reason as to why no commuter is allowed to enter or pass through this tunnel.
Behind me is the Chhat Puja Ghat in Delhi, located on the banks of the Yamuna River. We can see parts of the ghat which already have been submerged in water. Not just Delhi, but several other parts of North India are expected to experience heavy rainfall. A flood alert has already been declared by the Delhi government, and people living on the embankments and floodplains of the Yamuna River have been asked to shift to safer places.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of News Centre. More news and updates continue right here on CNBC.